The first time I ever held a fishing rod, I was 6 years old, and the fog was so thick it made the water look like sky. My father handed me the rod without saying a word. No warm advice. No smile. Just a grunt and a nod. That was enough. That was always enough. We never talked much, my father and I. We fished. We packed sandwiches we didn't eat. We poured coffee from the same old thermos. Every summer. Same dock, same tide. Same silence. Then, 3 weeks ago, he didn't come back. The storm was sudden. Wicked. The kind that makes the lobster boats turn in early and the seagulls fly inland. They found his skiff overturned near Jordan's Point. Life jacket still strapped to the rail. No sign of him. Just the boat rocking like a cradle, empty. His funeral was fast. Closed casket. A photo of him holding a haddock and squinting into the sun. My sister cried. My mother didn't. She just stared straight ahead like she was waiting for someone else to show up. A week later, I went back to the boathouse. I told myself I needed to organize his gear, but really I just needed to be somewhere he had touched. Somewhere I could still smell him: salt, diesel, coffee. That's when I found it. Tucked behind the old tackle box, under a coil of weathered line, was a sealed envelope. Thick. Yellowed. Addressed in faded ink to a single letter, C. No last name. No address. Just C. Inside, there was a letter folded neatly in thirds. My father's handwriting, sharp, slanted, impatient. You said never to write? But the boy, he has your eyes. I told myself for years it was just a coincidence. It's not. I know it now. I can't tell him. I don't even know how. I never wanted to hurt her. I never wanted to lose him either. I read it twice before I understood what it was saying. Then 3 more times because I didn't want to. I sat there on the cold dock floor for an hour. Maybe longer. The tide came in. The sun went down. My whole life shifted by degrees. I was the boy. And she, whoever she was, wasn't my mother. The next morning, I drove to the town library. It was still run by Miss Cartwright, who once smacked my hand with a ruler when I dog-eared a Hemingway. I lied and told her I was doing a genealogy project. She smiled like she didn't believe me, but she let me into the archives anyway. I pulled records. Fishing permits. Birth announcements. Old newspapers with yellow edges and type too small to read comfortably. I was looking for something. Anything. I didn't find C. But I did find a mention of my father, Clarence Henry Dalton, in a 1983 edition of the Bar Harbor Times. Local fishermen involved in minor fender bender outside Birch Harbor Inn. No injuries. Other party, Caroline M. Jessup, of Goldsboro. Caroline. C. Goldsboro is only 20 minutes up Route 1. I didn't tell my wife. I didn't tell my sister. I didn't even tell myself the truth until I was halfway there, windshield wipers clicking back and forth like a metronome to my unraveling sense of self. I wasn't sure what I expected to find. A grave? A woman? A child? What I didn't expect was for someone to recognize me before I even got out of the truck. Dalton? I turned. An old man, maybe 70, in a raincoat and Red Sox cap. His eyes narrowed. You're Clarence's boy. I nodded slowly. Yeah. He spat on the gravel. Didn't think you'd come back. Back? I'm sorry, do I know you? I asked. He laughed bitterly. You oughta. Used to run around these roads like a little ghost. Then poof. Gone. Just like your mother wanted. My mouth went dry. My mother's name is Elaine. His smile faded. Not here, it wasn't. I left the gas station without paying for the coffee. It was dark by the time I pulled up to a small white house at the edge of a salt marsh. Porch light flickering. Wind humming low through the pine. I don't know how I knew it was hers. I just did. I got out, heart hammering. Gravel loud underfoot. I knocked. The woman who opened the door was maybe 60. Gray hair pulled into a loose braid. Wrinkles like wind lines on the water. She looked at me the way a diver might look at something half buried in sand, like she already knew what it was, but hoped she was wrong. "You're him," she said softly. "I don't know who I am," I whispered. She opened the door wider. "Then I guess we both have a story to tell." The inside of her house smelled like old cedar and ginger tea. There were quilts on the couch, a brass oil lamp on the windowsill, and a framed photo of a boy, maybe 10 years old, smiling in a Red Sox jersey. Not me. Not anyone I knew. She handed me a mug. Her hands shook just enough to spill a little. I didn't say anything. Neither did she at first. Then she sat down and looked at me like she was trying to fit a jigsaw piece back into a puzzle that had been packed away for decades. "I'm Caroline," she said. "Caroline Jessup." I nodded. "You knew my father?" She laughed, short and sad. "I knew your father better than I should have." I didn't drink the tea. My hands were tight around the mug, but I didn't lift it. She stared out the window, her voice low, like she was talking to herself more than to me. "I met him in 1982. He used to fish off the Goldsboro coast in the summers. Said he liked the quiet. I didn't know he was married then. I didn't know a lot of things." My throat tightened. "And the boy in the photo?" Her eyes flicked toward the frame. "That's Charlie." I waited. The air between us swelled, like the tide before a storm. "He's your brother," she said. I felt my ribs tighten around my lungs. Half-brother. I didn't say it out loud, but the word clanged around in my head like a dropped anchor. "He was born in '85, she continued. "Clarence came back the next summer. I told him. He didn't say much. Just looked at the floor and said, 'It's complicated.' I wanted to laugh. Complicated? That was one word for it. "I thought he'd come back again," she said. "But he didn't. Not for years. Then one day, he showed up with a box of toys and tears in his eyes. Said he wanted to help. Said he wanted to know his son." "And did he?" I asked. She nodded. "He came by once or twice a year. Sometimes more. Always when it was raining. Said it made him feel like less of a sinner." I tried to picture my father, a man of few words, with calloused hands and a voice like gravel, playing with a child who wasn't supposed to exist. "Why didn't you ever tell anyone?" I asked. She looked at me sharply. "And ruin your life? Your mother's? Clarence made his choice. He wanted to protect you. And I didn't want Charlie to grow up feeling like a secret. But he was." She didn't answer that. Instead, she stood and walked over to a wooden box on a shelf. She opened it slowly, like it might bite. Inside were letters. Dozens of them. All in the same impatient scrawl. My father's handwriting. "I never wrote back," she said. "But I kept them." I reached for one, but she pulled the box back. "Charlie should be the one to give you these. If he wants to." I swallowed hard. "Where is he now?" Her lips thinned. "He left Maine years ago. Tried to join the Coast Guard, but got into trouble. Some fight. Broke a man's jaw in a bar down in Boothbay. He's in New York now. Long Island. Working boats. Keeps to himself. Of course he does. Just like our father." I left her house with a 1,000-pound silence in my chest. The road back to Bar Harbor blurred around the edges. My phone buzzed twice in the cup holder. My wife, probably. I didn't answer. When I got home, I found my sister on the porch. She had a bottle of whiskey between her knees and a look that said she'd been waiting a while. "You okay?" she asked. I sat next to her. "No." She handed me the bottle. "Me either." We didn't talk for a long time. Then she said, "I found something too. In Dad's dresser. A photo." She pulled it from her jacket. It was my father, younger than I'd ever seen him. Standing on a dock, grinning with one arm slung around a boy who wasn't me. Charlie. He lied to us. she said. Yeah, I whispered. But maybe not just to us. That night, I sat alone at the kitchen table with the letter again. You said never to write? But the boy, he has your eyes. I went to the bathroom and looked in the mirror. I'd always thought I looked like my mother. But now, I wasn't sure who I saw. A man who didn't know who he was. Or a boy whose whole life had been built on a fisherman's lie. The next morning, I drove down to the dock. Not the tourist one by the harbor with the lobster rolls and t-shirt stands. The real one. The one where my father taught me how to gut fish and tie knots that would hold against a wave trying to take your life. The one with rusted cleats and gull's shit on the railing and salt-cracked boards that groaned when you walked across them like they remembered everything. I brought the thermos. Didn't even know why. It was empty, but I poured a cup anyway and sat at the edge with my boots dangling over the side, watching the gray water slap the pilings like it was tired. I wanted to talk to him. But I didn't know which version of him I'd be talking to anymore. The father who taught me to fish. Or the man who taught me how to lie without saying a word. The next week moved like cold syrup. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't stop thinking about that little white house in Goldsboro, the quilts, the photo, the way Caroline had said, "He's your brother," like it was both a gift and a wound. I told my wife eventually. Sat her down at the kitchen table and handed her the letter. She read it in silence. Didn't cry. Didn't speak for a long time. Then she reached across the table, took my hand, and said, "So what are you going to do about him?" Him. Charlie. The brother I never knew I had. I called every marina in Long Island I could find. Most were dead ends. Some just hung up. Some asked too many questions. Finally, a man named Tony at a dry dock in Montauk said, "Yeah, I know a Charlie Jessup. Keeps to himself. Works on engines. Drinks like he's trying to forget something permanent." I asked if he'd pass along my number. He laughed. "You his parole officer or something?" "No," I said. "I'm his brother." The line went quiet. Then, shit. Charlie didn't call. 4 days. And then one night, just past 2 a.m., my phone lit up. No caller ID. Just a long pause after I answered, and then a voice like sandpaper. "You said you're Nathan?" "Yeah. I don't know what you think this is." "I don't either." Another pause. Longer. Then a breath that sounded like it came from somewhere deep. "My mom told me about you when I was 15, he said. Said I had a brother who got to grow up with him. Said I shouldn't hate you for that." I sat up in bed. My wife turned toward the wall, pretending to be asleep. "I didn't know about you," I said. "I know," Charlie replied. "That's what makes it worse." He agreed to meet. 2 days later. A ferry terminal in Orient Point. Neutral ground. Public. Safe. I didn't know what I expected. A punch? A breakdown? A stranger who looked like me? He was already there when I arrived. Leaning against a rusted post, smoke curling from the end of a cigarette. Tall. Broad shoulders. Same chin. Same tired eyes. I walked up slow. He didn't move. Just watched me like I was a boat coming into harbor with no flag to say who I belonged to. "You look like him," he said. "So do you." He nodded. Dropped the cigarette. Crushed it under his boot. We stood there, the ferry horns in the background, gulls crying overhead, 2 grown men blinking against the wind and the weight of everything we never got. "Did he ever talk about me?" he asked. I shook my head. "Not once." Charlie laughed bitterly. "Figures. The man could gut a mackerel in 12 seconds, but couldn't face a damn truth if it was choking him." I swallowed hard. "I found his letters. Caroline kept them." His jaw tightened. "She kept everything. Like it would change the ending." We sat on a bench. Didn't say anything for a while. Just watched the water. Finally I said, "I don't know why he didn't tell me." Charlie glanced sideways. "Because he was scared. Of what it would mean." For you. For him. For the neat little world he built. I stared at my hands. They weren't neat. No, he said quietly. They weren't. We talked until the sun dipped low. Not about much. Fish. Boats. Bar Harbor. Goldsboro. He told me he used to pretend we were twins. Said he'd imagine me waiting at the dock every summer, that one day he'd just show up and I'd say, "Where the hell have you been?" And we'd go fishing like we were supposed to. I told him I used to think I was missing something. A piece of myself. Like I'd been built wrong. He looked at me and said, "You weren't built wrong. You were just told a story that wasn't finished." And then he stood. Shoved his hands in his jacket. "I don't know if I can be anyone's brother," he said. "I've spent most of my life pretending I wasn't even someone's son." "I get that," I said. "Believe me." He nodded. Started to walk away. Then stopped. "I got a boat down in Freeport," he said over his shoulder. "If you're ever in town, bring a rod." That night, I sat on the motel bed, holding my father's old thermos. I poured whiskey into it. Just enough. Then I wrote a letter. To no one. To everyone. And I burned it. Because some truths aren't meant to be mailed. They're meant to be carried. Like tackle. Or scars. It's strange how grief shifts shape. At first, it's like a wave knocking you off your feet, sudden, violent, and impossible to see coming. Then it becomes something else. A low tide that exposes everything buried in the sand. That's what it felt like, going back to Bar Harbor after meeting Charlie. Like someone had drained the bay, and I could finally see the wreck beneath the surface. My father hadn't just lied. He'd sculpted his silence into a legacy. And me, my sister, even Charlie, we were the ones who had to live inside it. I told my sister about Charlie. I didn't show her the letters. Not yet. But I told her the truth. We sat in the old boathouse, the one Dad used to use before the pier was rebuilt. Dust everywhere. The smell of salt and gasoline soaked into the walls. Her face didn't change much. Just her hands tightening around the edge of the bench. "I always thought there was something off," she said. "Not bad. Just off. Like he was carrying something too heavy and didn't want us to notice." I nodded. "He was." She looked at me. "You still love him?" I didn't answer for a long time. Then, "I think I'm trying to love the parts of him that were true." She wiped her eyes. "That's all we can do." The next few days passed in a kind of quiet reckoning. I started sorting through Dad's things with more care. Not to find more secrets, but to see if I could find something honest in what he left behind. And I did. Sort of. Tucked inside the lining of his old tackle bag was a photograph. Creased and water-stained, like it had been handled 1,000 times. My father. Caroline. And a baby. Charlie. They were standing by a lighthouse. I recognized it, Prospect Harbor. My father had an arm around her, the baby held against his chest like he didn't want to let go. The look on his face wasn't guilt. It wasn't shame. It was something else. Something close to joy. Something close to being free. And it wrecked me. I called Charlie again that night. Didn't know if he'd answer. He did. Eventually. "Yeah? I found a photo," I said. "You, him, and your mom. By the lighthouse." Silence. Then a slow exhale. "I remember that day," he said. "I fell asleep in his arms. Mom said it was the only time she ever saw him cry." We sat in the static for a long while. "I think he wanted to be better," I said. "I think he just didn't know how." Charlie's voice was quiet. "Sometimes I wish I hated him. It'd be easier." "Me too." Another pause. Then, "You ever think about what kind of fathers we'll be?" That one hit like a hook in the ribs. "I do now." 2 weeks later, Charlie came up to Bar Harbor. Didn't say why. Just showed up in a borrowed truck with a duffel bag and a guarded look in his eye. He didn't stay with me. Got a room at the inn by the pier. But we met every morning at the dock, like we'd been doing it for years. We fished. We didn't always talk. But we fished. Like it was some old language we both knew, even if we didn't know what the words meant anymore. One morning, I brought the thermos. Poured 2 cups of coffee. Handed him one. He looked at it, then at me. Same one? Same one. He took a sip, winced. Still tastes like burned oil. We laughed. The first real laugh we'd shared. That evening, we built a fire on the beach. My sister came. So did her kids. Charlie didn't say much. But when my nephew asked if he wanted to help with the driftwood, Charlie stood up, nodded, and followed him without a word. I watched them stack branches like kindling, side by side. One man trying to figure out if he could still build something that didn't burn. Later, after everyone else had gone, Charlie and I sat in the glow of the dying fire. You think he ever forgave himself? He asked. I don't know, I said. But I think he tried to. He nodded slowly. I want to visit the grave. I looked at him. Are you sure? He didn't answer. Just stared into the embers like they could tell him what the ocean never did. The next morning, we went together. The cemetery was quiet. Fog rolled low across the grass like a tide looking for somewhere to settle. We stood at the headstone in silence. Clarence Henry Dalton, 1956 to 2024. Gone to sea. Charlie bent down. Laid something at the base. It was a small, carved lure. Hand-painted. Worn at the edges. My first one, he said. He gave it to me. Told me to use it when the water was murky, and the fish couldn't see straight. He looked up at me. I think he was talking about himself. After the graveyard, we didn't talk much on the drive back. The old Dodge creaked and hummed like it understood what silence was for. Charlie stared out the window, arms folded tight, like he didn't trust what might spill out if he let them rest. When we pulled up to my house, he didn't get out. Just kept staring ahead. He could have said something. He finally muttered. One word. One letter. Anything. I nodded. I think he believed silence was love. That by not saying it, he was protecting everyone. Charlie shook his head. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. But he didn't sound angry. Just tired. Like someone who's been carrying a secret so long, it starts to feel like a second spine. He stayed 3 more days. Long enough to walk the old trails. Long enough to eat at the bait shack and say, it's not as good as Mom's, even though he cleared the whole plate. Long enough for us to stop feeling like strangers in matching skin. The night before he left, he gave me a folded piece of paper. I wrote this when I was 16, he said. Thought about mailing it. Never did. I waited until he left to read it. To the brother I never met. I don't know your name. Or what you look like. But I hope you like boats. I hope you're not afraid of the water. I hope when you stand on the dock, you feel something pulling you, not down, but out. Towards something bigger. I hope he told you stories. I hope he taught you to tie knots and clean a fish and spit into the wind when you're pissed. I hope he gave you everything I dreamed about getting. I don't hate you. I just wonder how it felt. To be chosen. If we ever meet, I won't punch you. I might ask you to fish with me. I think that's how we say I'm sorry in our family. Charlie. I read it twice. Then again. And I cried. Not because it was sad. But because it was truer than anything I'd ever said out loud. That weekend, I went to see Caroline again. Brought her a fresh haddock and a bag of blueberries from the farm stand. She didn't ask why I came. She knew. She made tea, and we sat on the porch, the breeze whispering through the trees like it had something old to confess. I always hoped you'd find each other, she said. Why didn't you tell me when I came that first time? I asked. She looked down at her hands. Because I wanted to see what kind of man you were first. Not Clarence's son. Just you. And? She smiled. You stayed. We talked for hours. About Charlie. About my father. About how love, when left unsaid too long, rots like fish in the sun. She gave me one of the letters. Just one. The last one he ever sent her. Caroline. I'm sorry I wasn't braver. I'm sorry I ran. But I think I've done right by at least one of them. Nathan is strong. He's good. I see the sea in him. He never asks why I'm quiet. He just sits with me. That's the kind of man I wanted to be. If he ever comes looking, tell him I was scared. Tell him I loved him. Both of them. I just didn't know how to hold it all without breaking. I never learned how to let the truth float. Always thought it would sink me. Forgive me. See. I folded the letter and slipped it into my back pocket. That night, I walked to the dock alone. No thermos. No pole. Just me and the tide. And I let it go. Not the letter. The weight. I forgave him. Not because he asked, but because I needed to. Because sons who don't forgive become fathers who can't. A week later, I found a small package in my mailbox. No return address. Inside was a photo. Charlie. Standing on a skiff. Holding up a striped base with a grin so wide it looked like it might split his face. On the back, in black sharp, one line. Bring bait next time. You're buying beer. Spring came late that year. The harbor stayed half frozen until mid-April, and the gulls hung inland like they didn't trust the wind yet. But something in me had thawed. Grief no longer hit like a punch. It came more like the tide now, steady, inevitable. Something I could learn to move with, instead of drown beneath. Charlie called once a week now. Usually short. Always awkward. But he called. Caught a blue yesterday, he'd say. Or, new kid at the dock doesn't know a bowline from a shoelace. Sometimes he'd just call to ask about Bar Harbor. The smells. The weather. As if trying to remember something he never actually lived. One Sunday, I took the boat out alone. The same skiff Dad used to take me on. I'd rebuilt the engine myself over the winter, sanding down the rust, replacing every part that rattled. It felt like restoring a ghost. Out on the water, I dropped anchor near the old rocks, where the current twists just enough to confuse the fish into biting. Same spot Dad used to go. I cast my line and sat back. No radio. No phone. Just the water slapping wood. I thought about what I'd say to him, if I could. Not to accuse. Not anymore. Just to ask. Why didn't you believe we could carry the truth with you? And maybe more importantly, why did you teach me everything except how to talk? Back on land, I started writing again. Not letters. Just thoughts. Memories. A notebook full of half-finished conversations with a man who could gut a fish in one motion but never told me who I was. I wrote about the tackle box. The first time he let me steer. The way his silence filled the room like fog, thick and quiet and hard to see through. And I wrote about Charlie. What it meant to find him. What it meant to forgive him before I even knew him. What it meant to forgive myself. My sister joined me at the house one evening. She brought photos. Family ones? The kind you only look at when someone's died or someone's born. We spread them across the table. Dad holding me as a baby. Him asleep in a deck chair, mouth open, sunburned to hell. One of all of us at Acadia, when we still believed the world was simple. Then she slid a photo out from her jacket pocket. It was newer. Me and Charlie. Taken by her kid on the beach the day of the fire. We were looking at the ocean. Not talking. Just standing there. Side by side. You look like brothers, she said. I smiled. We are. We started a tradition after that. Every first Saturday of the month, Charlie would drive up. Sometimes for a day. Sometimes longer. We'd fish. Cook. Fix things that didn't need fixing. He was getting better at being around people. Still quiet. But not like Dad's kind of quiet. Not withholding. Just careful. Like he'd learned that being open was a risk, but not one he was unwilling to take anymore. One night, after too much whiskey, We ended up back at the dock. Same bench. Same moonlight. Same damn thermos. Charlie looked at me and said, "You think he'd be proud of this?" "This?" I asked. "Us." I didn't answer right away. Just stared at the tide and let the moment settle. Then I said, "I think he'd be jealous." Charlie laughed. That deep, surprised kind of laugh that comes from somewhere you didn't know still had air. That fall, Caroline got sick. Charlie called me from the hospital. His voice small again. Like that 16-year-old who never sent the letter. I drove down the next day. She was in bed, thin as driftwood. But her eyes were bright. Still sharp. "I always knew you'd come back," she whispered. "I didn't know where I was going," I said. She smiled. "That's how it works, Nathan. We drift until something pulls us in." She passed 2 days later. We buried her near the marsh where her porch looked out. Charlie didn't speak at the funeral. He just stood with me, holding a small tackle box she'd left him in her will. Inside were photos. 1 letter. And 2 identical lures. 1 marked C. 1 marked N. We went fishing that afternoon. Didn't say much. Didn't need to. And when the line pulled tight, and Charlie reeled in something heavy and alive, he held it up and grinned. Not because it was big. Not because it was rare. But because we were there. Together. And for once, that was enough. Winter came early the following year. The harbor froze in October, and the sky wore that cold, pewter look like it was daring you to hope for spring. Charlie stayed up north longer than usual. Something in him had changed after Caroline passed. Like losing her finally unlocked the last part of himself he'd kept bolted shut. He didn't say much about it. He never did. But one night, sitting on the porch with snowflakes dancing in the glow of the deck light, he turned to me and asked, "You ever wonder how much of him is in us?" I didn't have to ask who he meant. "All the time," I said. He nodded, took a slow pull from a bottle of cheap beer, then said, "I get scared sometimes. That I'll become him without realizing it." I looked at him, this man who had learned to exist in the silence between other people's choices, and I said, "We already didn't." In February, I got a call from a woman named Elsie who ran the bait shop out on Route 3. "We've got some of your dad's things here," she said. "He kept a locker. You might want to come by." I didn't even know he had a locker. It was small. Metal. Rusty as hell. Inside was a single duffel bag, a notebook, and a box of hand-carved lures. The notebook wasn't what I expected. It wasn't about fishing. It was filled with sketches. Not good ones. But full of effort. Boats. Tackle. A pair of boys fishing off the same dock. The last page had a line scribbled in ink. If I'd known how to say it, I would've. But I was raised by storms, and storms don't teach you how to speak. Just how to survive. I sat down right there on the floor and cried. Not because he hadn't said it, but because I finally believed he'd wanted to. Charlie read the notebook in one sitting. Didn't speak the whole time. When he finished, he closed it, held it against his chest, and said, "We should do something with this." "What do you mean?" I asked. He shrugged. "I don't know. Build something. Name a boat. Tell the story. Something." For a long time, I didn't think that story deserved to be told. It was jagged. Incomplete. Full of lies and half-truths and silence that echoed too long. But I was starting to understand something. The story didn't have to be clean to be worth telling. It just had to be honest. So we started building. A skiff. Together. We used Dad's old plans. Adjusted them. Made it our own. We worked slow. Measured twice. Cursed a lot. Laughed more. The neighbors called us mad, building a boat in the middle of March with snow still crusting the ground. But it wasn't about the water. Not yet. It was about reclaiming something. Not just from him, but from the part of ourselves we didn't know could make anything lasting. When we finished, we painted her. Simple white with a blue stripe. The name in black letters across the bow. The second cast. Charlie came up with it. He said, "Everyone gets a first cast. But it's the second one that counts. The one where you know what you're doing, and what you're fishing for." We launched her in May. Calm day. Water like glass. People came out to watch. My sister. Her kids. Even some of the old-timers who remembered my dad from before the storm took him. Charlie and I took her out past the breakers, engines humming, wind soft against our faces. We didn't bring rods that day. Didn't bring beer. Just the notebook. We anchored near the rocks. And I read aloud the final page again, this time not as a son still hurting, but as a man who finally understood that silence wasn't always cruelty. Sometimes it was fear. Sometimes it was regret. And sometimes it was love wrapped in a language we never got taught. We dropped the notebook into the water together. Let it sink. Let it go. Charlie watched it disappear beneath the surface and said, "That's the last secret." "Yeah," I whispered. "It is." Later, back at the dock, someone asked if the boat was named after a memory. Charlie said, "No. It's named after what comes next." And I nodded. Because that's the thing about the sea. It doesn't care about the first time you cast. It only ever meets you where you are. And gives you another chance. Summer came in like it was making up for lost time. Warm winds, high sun, and tourists back in Bar Harbor, chasing the myth of the simple life, salt air and lobster rolls and the illusion that small towns hold no shadows. But ours did. Ours always did. Charlie stayed for most of June. Said he needed the break. But I knew what he really needed was the dock, the water, and something he didn't have to fix with his fists. We fished nearly every day. Sometimes with my nephews. Sometimes just us. He was getting better at being here. Being still. One evening, after a long day on the water, we sat in the backyard and grilled haddock we'd pulled in ourselves. The air smelled like smoke and lemon. My wife brought out plates. My sister poured drinks. And for a moment, it didn't feel like something we had to earn. It just felt like family. Later, after the dishes were in the sink and the kids were passed out on the couch, Charlie and I sat out back with the last of the bourbon. The moon was high. The tide was out. "You ever think about having your own?" he asked. "Kids?" "Yeah." I nodded slowly. "All the time." He took a sip, then looked down at the glass. "I don't know if I'd be good at it," he said. "Every time I think about being someone's father, I see him. Not the good parts. The quiet parts. The absent parts. You're not him." He looked at me. "You sure?" "Yeah," I said. "Because you already asked the question he never did, what if I mess this up?" He smiled. "Barely. That's a start." By July, we started taking people out on the second cast. Tourists mostly. Some locals. It wasn't about the money. It was about the motion. The habit of doing something with your hands while the mind tried to settle. We taught them how to bait lines, how to reel slow and steady, how to sit in silence without feeling like they had to fill it. Charlie was good with the kids. Better than I expected. He'd ruffle their hair, tell them half-true stories about pirate gold buried in Bar Harbor, and show them how to tie a fisherman's knot with their shoelaces. Once, I caught him watching a boy reel in his first fish, eyes wide, hands trembling, shouting for his dad to look. Charlie smiled. And for a moment I saw a version of him I never imagined. One where he wasn't haunted. Just present. Then came the letter. Not from Dad. From a lawyer in Ellsworth. Estate business. Apparently, there was one final thing left behind. A property deed. Small cabin out in Franklin. No one knew about it. Not even Mom. I took Charlie with me to check it out. The place was tucked in behind a thicket of pine, barely visible from the road. Moss on the roof. Window cracked. But the key still worked. Inside. A cot. A table. A stove. A single photo on the wall. It was us. Not from when we were grown. But a sketch. Pencil, soft lines, dated 1994. Charlie about 9. Me around the same. Standing side by side. Same faces. Same eyes. Drawn from memory. You think he ever came here? Charlie asked. I think this is where he went when he couldn't be the version of himself, I said. Yeah, Charlie said softly. Where he didn't have to lie to anyone. We spent the night there. Built a fire in the pit out back. Drank too much. Didn't talk about Dad. Didn't need to. Instead, we talked about what we'd build next. The charter business. A program for kids who never had dads but still needed the water. Still needed the ritual of line and reel and wind in the face to know they could belong somewhere. We made plans. Not because we were ready. But because we'd waited long enough not to be. That summer, something shifted in me. In both of us. We stopped trying to define ourselves by the man who raised us in pieces. And we started living like we were whole. Charlie told me he was staying. Not just for the season. For good. He got a place across town. Small, creaky, and perfect. And every morning at 5:30, we'd meet at the dock. No words. Just coffee, rope, and sea. One morning in late August, as the sky started to burn orange over the bay, Charlie looked at me and said, I never knew how to be someone's brother. You just show up, I said. That's all. He nodded. Then he grinned. I got you something. He pulled out a small wooden box. Inside was a lure. Identical to the ones Caroline left us. Only this one had a third letter carved into it. C-N-J. Jessup? I asked. He shrugged. Thought I'd take the name. As a middle. Not to erase the old one, just to make space for both. I felt something twist in my chest. Not pain. Not grief. Pride. Yeah, I said. That sounds right. We cast our lines. Let them sink. Waited. Didn't speak. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was waiting for the truth to surface. It already had. Fall arrived like an old friend. Slow, familiar, and a little heavier than last year. The leaves turned. The water cooled. The tourists thinned out like smoke after a burn. Charlie and I kept fishing. Not for money. Not even for fish, really. Just for the rhythm. The way casting and reeling gives shape to a day. The way the sea doesn't ask anything from you except to keep showing up. We were out near Bay's Harbor Light one morning, fog still clinging to the bay, when Charlie turned to me and said, I think I want to teach. Teach what? Fishing. Boats. Whatever. I want to do it with the kids. The ones without dads. The ones like us. I looked at him. Not because I was surprised. But because something in his face had shifted. Like he'd finally forgiven the sea for what it took. That's a good idea, I said. He smiled. Then pulled a folded flyer from his jacket. Harbor Youth Center After School Program Grant Application. You already started? I asked. He shrugged. Figured I'd cast a line. See if anything bites. By October, he'd rented a space. An old bait shop with warped floors and a leaky roof. But it had character. And more importantly, it had a dock. We painted it ourselves. Hung nets on the walls. Mounted old photographs, lures, charts of the coast. Called it the Second Cast Center. His idea. Again. Said it was for kids who needed a second chance. A second name. A second story. I couldn't have written it better if I tried. One afternoon, I walked in and saw him teaching a kid how to tie a cleat hitch. 12 years old. Quiet. Same look in his eyes I used to have. Charlie was patient. Gentle. And when the kid messed up the knot and muttered, I'm not good at this, Charlie said, You don't have to be good today. You just have to come back tomorrow. That's when I knew. He was going to be the kind of man our father didn't know how to be. Not because he had the tools, but because he'd learned how to build them himself. We took the boat out the day the first frost hit. Not to fish. Just to mark the season. Like a ritual. Like saying goodbye to something that had finally stopped hurting. The water was cold. But calm. Like it had forgiven us, too. We didn't talk much that day. Just let the silence sit between us. Not heavy anymore. Not broken. Just full. Back on land, I visited Dad's grave again. First time in months. Brought him coffee. Left it on the stone. You missed a lot, I said. But you gave us just enough to find each other. I sat for a while. Watched the wind run its fingers through the grass. Then I said the thing I hadn't been able to say until now. I forgive you. And I meant it. Not because he deserved it. But because I did. Thanksgiving came. Charlie brought pie. Burnt the crust. Didn't matter. He sat next to my sister. Taught my niece how to scale a fish using a spoon. Told my nephew a story about a halibut that almost pulled him into the sea. My mom even smiled when she saw him. Not big. But real. I think she saw what he could have been. What he was becoming. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, I found Charlie out on the porch. Same bottle between us. Same old thermos, now filled with decent coffee instead of Dad's tar. Think you'll ever have kids? I asked. He looked up at the stars. Nodded once. Maybe. If I ever get brave enough to believe I won't screw it up. You will. He raised an eyebrow. Screw it up? Be brave. We toasted in silence. To the past. To what came after. And then he said it. Hey, Nathan? Yeah? Thanks for finding me. I didn't say anything. Just put my hand on his shoulder. Because sometimes the best things don't need to be answered. They just need to be felt. It's been 3 years. Since the letter. Since the lie surfaced like a half-sunk buoy and turned everything I thought I knew inside out. The dock looks different now. Charlie rebuilt part of it last summer. New pilings, fresh boards, even a bench he carved himself from a washed-up pine. He says it's for the kids. But I catch him sitting there most mornings before anyone arrives, just staring out at the water like it still owes him an answer. It doesn't. Not anymore. We stopped needing answers the day we stopped trying to make sense of who our father was. And started becoming the men he couldn't be. The second cast center has grown. We run charters on the weekends. Classes during the week. Workshops on knots, engine repair, and weather reading. But really, it's about something else. Every kid who walks through those doors thinks they're just here to fish. What they don't realize. What Charlie and I didn't realize until too late. Is that fishing is just an excuse to hold still long enough for someone to notice you. To see you. And that kind of attention? That quiet, steady kind? It saves lives. One of the kids, Marcus, is 14. Talks with his eyes down. Hasn't said a word about his dad, but he always asks to use Charlie's rod. Last week, he caught his first striper. Big one. Fought hard. Charlie stood behind him the whole time, whispering encouragement like a prayer. Afterward, the kid looked up at him and said, "Think I could work here one day?" Charlie didn't even hesitate. "You already do." I nearly lost it. Right there on the dock. Because that's how it starts. A small kindness. A moment. A second cast. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I never found the letter. If I'd never driven to Goldsboro. If I'd never knocked on that door. What if I'd let the lie stay buried? What if I'd never known about the other son, the other family, the other half of my story? Would I be happier? Simpler? Untouched? Maybe. But I'd also be incomplete. Because even lies carry truth in their shadows. And some families are made, not born. They grow in the spaces between the hurt, in the pauses of a sentence that never got finished. We renamed the boat last spring. Not because the first name was wrong, but because the next part of our story had begun. She's called the Caroline now. For the woman who carried the truth when no one else would. Who chose not to burn bridges, even when she had every reason to. When we told her story to the kids at the center, Charlie said, "She didn't yell. She didn't destroy. She just waited until the right time to be heard. That silence wasn't weakness. It was grace." Sometimes we still find pieces of our father. An old reel. A scratched compass. A note scribbled on the back of a tide chart, half faded with salt. I keep them in a drawer, not because I need them, but because they remind me where I started. Who I was before the surface broke. And me? I'm still here. Still waking up at 5 a.m. Still pouring coffee into that same dented thermos. Still walking the same dock he taught me to fish on, now holding the hands of kids who don't know how to ask for a place in the world. But I see them. Like I was once seen. Like Charlie was. We don't talk much about him anymore. We don't have to. He's there. In the smell of diesel and salt. In the knot of the line. In the way we both sometimes pause before speaking, trying to find the words he never could. One of the younger boys, Riley, asked me last week why I fish. I smiled. Took a long breath. And I told him. Because it's the only way I know how to keep moving and stay still at the same time. He looked confused. I patted his shoulder. Give it a few years. You'll understand. So this is what I know now. He taught me how to fish. He taught me how to listen to the water. How to keep a boat steady and chop. How to find stillness in the pull. He just never taught me how to be whole. That part, Charlie and I had to learn on our own. And we're still learning. Every time the line goes taut. Every time we cast again. Every time we stand shoulder to shoulder and face a world that doesn't owe us anything, but gives us another chance anyway.